Math 3, Formative 2. This is for Unit 8, Module 4, Topic 1, Part 1. The graph of f of x equals -3 cosine x plus 1 is shown below. Use the graph to identify the characteristics listed. So the period is how long it takes to complete one full cycle before the graph starts repeating itself again. You could go peak to peak, valley to valley. So for example, peak to peak could be something like that. You want to take your big X value minus your small x value. So pi minus negative pi would be 2 pi. So that's one way of looking at it. If you look at valley to valley, I could go from here all the way to here. So again, we'd want to do the big X value minus the small x value. So 2 pi minus 0 would be 2 pi. So same answer. And those would be probably the two most common ways to do this particular problem. You could technically go from a middle point to a middle point. Let me see if I can show that. So for example, you could go from like right here. This is the midline. This is the middle. So you could go all the way up to the top, all the way down to the bottom, and then back to the middle. So that would be 5 pi over 2 minus pi over 2, which would be 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. So any way you look at it, it takes 2 pi in order to complete one full cycle before this graph starts repeating itself. I'm going to temporarily skip amplitude and go back to it because usually you want to use the max and min in order to get the amplitude. So let's skip down to C and D. Maximum literally just means what's the highest point on the graph. So I'm looking at my y values, what's the highest point. So just way up here at the top, highest point is a y value of 4. So my maximum is just 4. And the minimum is the exact opposite. What's the lowest point on the graph? So down here at the bottom, lowest y value, -2. Now let's go back up to amplitude. Amplitude is 1/2 times the absolute value of the maximum minus the minimum. So in this case, 1/2 times the absolute value of 4 minus -2. So that would be, remember that double negative turns into a positive. So 1/2 times absolute value of 6 equals 3. Now remember, amplitude is always going to be positive. It's a distance from the midline up to the maximum, or it's a distance from the midline down to the minimum. So amplitude is always positive. So if I draw in this, well, we'll get to that in a second. Let me go down to midline. Midline is y equals the maximum value plus the minimum value divided by 2. So my maximum is 4, my minimum is -2, divided by 2 would be 1. And when you do a midline, you have to do y equals, and then whatever the value is, y equals 1. So now let me put that visual in the graph. So y equals 1 is this horizontal line right here. So that cuts through the middle of the graph. So from that midline up to the top is a distance of 3. And from that midline down to the minimum is also a distance of 3. So at the end of this, you can kind of double check and make sure that everything makes sense.